Oh, thank you, Mana. It's so good to be with you. I've been looking forward for a couple months to being with you, and at just the sovereignty of God is so interesting. When your leaders asked me to come and speak, I didn't know, and I don't think some of them knew that you were going to be in the middle of a series on Job, and they didn't know that that is really Job's message is one of my life messages. So it's just fun how God works things out and coordinates everything. Job experienced a lot of pain. I've experienced pain, and you've experienced pain, and some of you are experiencing pain, and all of you will experience pain. Pain is a part of living in this broken world. Not sure what it will be or what it has been. It could be the pain of a broken relationship, could be the pain of broken health or broken dreams that you had to give up. It could be pain that you've experienced in the past, pain you're experiencing now, or pain that's coming in the future. But pain is part of life in this broken world. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? I wonder what kind of painful experiences you have experienced and how they have shaped you. My family and I went through several years of extreme pain. We have now come through that into a season of joy. Our first grandchild is named Rainan, and that was a declaration because that's the Hebrew word for joy. And we have been in a season of joy for the last 6-7 years, and we're continuing in that. And I want you to see your way from pain to come into joy. I'm actually here to share with you how pain can become a gift. It's a gift that shapes us in a redemptive way. And we are all going to experience pain, but we get to choose how that pain shapes us. It can shape us in a redemptive way or a destructive way. It's designed to reveal and refine the habits of our hearts and our beliefs and our relationships and our view of God. As wave after wave of pain crashed into our lives, I got really familiar with the book of Job. Spent a lot of time with Job, like you're doing as a group right now. And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at 4 lessons from the book of Job. The first lesson is that pain reveals and refines the habits of our heart. Job 1:1 says, "In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright, and he feared God, and he shunned evil." Job was the kind of man you want to have as your neighbor. He was a really good guy. He was the kind of guy who didn't walk past the homeless man. He stopped. He not only gave him $5, he took him to get a meal and maybe helped him to get a job. He was a really good guy. But Job, the story that has come down through the ages to us, demonstrates that bad things do happen to good people. And we struggle with that. Job had a big family too. We have 7 children. Job had 10 children. Maybe he was a homeschooler, I don't know. But it says in Job 1:5 that when a period of feasting had run its course, I mean, this family liked to party. Now, when you've got 7 or 10 kids, there's a lot of birthday parties, right? So we're just going from birthday party to birthday party. I don't know if this was a birthday party, but they partied a lot, apparently. They like to have a good time. So when a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. Perhaps my children had sinned. Do any of you have children? I mean, if I went and offered a sacrifice every time I thought one of my children had sinned, I'd be a very busy man, you know. It leads you to pray for your kids. They say when your kids are small, you talk to God about them, and when they get bigger, you talk to God about them. Right? Well, Job, on a regular basis, would go and offer sacrifices because he cared about the spiritual life of his children. But it's interesting, what the way he expressed that was by offering a burnt sacrifice. He would, we don't have a lot of details here, but according to the customs of that day, he probably, there was a reason he had 7,000 sheep. He would take one of those sheep and he would take a very sharp knife and he would take that sheep by the neck and he would take that sharp and cut the lamb's throat, and blood would spurt out onto the ground, and the lamb would collapse to the ground, dead. And then they would prepare the sacrifice for each of his children to cover their sin with the blood of the lamb. We just sang about the blood of another lamb that covers our sin. We know from that we owe our life to God, because way back when Adam fell, God said, the soul that sins will die. If you sin, you will die. Somebody had to die. And that sin had to be covered so that we could live. So all of us who are in Christ know that we owe our life to God, and we're not our own because we've been bought with a price. And in a slightly different way, Job's children knew that, and Job knew that every time he would sacrifice to cover the sins of his children. So he has this custom. We had a custom in our family. All these birthday parties, you got to have some customs, right? And every time, we do affirmations, and there's the birthday cake, and there's the singing. But one thing that we do that may be different than what some do is that at some point in that party, my dear wife will say, look at that child in the eye and say, I want you to know you belong to God and not to us. Before we brought you home from the hospital, we dedicated you to God. We gave you back to God. You belong to God, Wesley. You belong to God, Danielle. And so we just remind them every year, you actually don't belong to us. You belong to God. He created you in the womb. We participated, but he created you. And he bought you with his own blood. You belong to God. So he had this custom. We have that custom. So in Job 1:20 to 21, when something very tragic happened in Job's family, he was prepared by that custom, by that habit of his heart. Then, after this, after what? After a hurricane had come through and killed all of his children in one day. After this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. I want to mention that I work with Arabs a lot. They know how to express themselves. He tore his robe, shaved his head. Someone said this morning I should shave my head to be in this pulpit. That took a few minutes to shave his head. And for an Arab man, that was a very serious thing to do. It was a sign of deep mourning. He knew how to express himself like a good Arab would. He got up and he tore his robe. He shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. What an amazing response. All right, think about how you would respond if you're away, a hurricane hit your home and killed all of your children in one day, and you got your news. What would you do? Then he fell to the ground. Then he went out and got drunk? No, that's what some of us might do to deal with our pain. Then he watched some pornography in order to comfort himself? No, that's not what Job did. That was not his way of coping with pain. Then he ate some ice cream? Any of us ever eaten comfort food? No. Then he fell to the ground in worship. He was prepared by the habits of his heart. He knew that those children belonged to God, and God had called in the loan. And he fell to the ground and worshiped. I want to share a brief video that tells you the story of how our hearts were prepared and how we responded when tragedy hit our family.
Each day from my office window, I look at the ridge where I last hiked with my 12-year-old son, Ian. There we had talked over the temptations and pressures that he would face as a young man. And late one night, I found myself sitting beside Ian's hospital bed. I'll always remember February 4th as one of the most difficult days of my life. The day that I learned that Ian has cancer. I don't think that I've ever cried so much in one day or even in a week. I feel numb. My prayers are minimal, just breath prayers for the most part, sighs toward God. What I want most is beyond our human reach. Yet is physical healing what I want most? No. More than anything, I want Ian to know God deeply. So Lord, I pray that through this you and Ian will become intimate friends. Help him to learn to pour out his heart to you. Help me to lead him in this by example. I've prayed regularly that he would come to know your Father love through me. May it be so, even now. In the coming months, I often found myself marveling at Ian. I was proud of him as he shrugged off brutal chemotherapy to lead his friends on new adventures. I was relieved as his courageous love won over the heart of his older brother who used to hate him. He was becoming the man I had longed for him to become. And my family was becoming the family I had longed for us to become. I crested the roller coaster of emotions as Ian was declared cancer-free, then plunged back into desperation when it resurfaced in his brain. I received the dreaded call. Ian had a grand mal seizure. He collapsed into the arms of a friend. I needed to meet the ambulance at the hospital. Our hope soared again when the cancer began to recede and Ian began to walk once again. Our faith picked up steam like a locomotive as we prayed. Then he died. The next day, we sat down at the dinner table with Ian's brothers and sisters and did not leave for many hours. In the midst of my searing grief, another feeling emerged. I was incredibly proud that none of my children were backing off from God or from one another. Together, we wrestled with the hard questions. What in the world was God thinking? Would we trust him with our prayers again? Ian's older brothers agreed that Ian had somehow become their older brother, their hero. And I saw that somehow through our pain, we are becoming more rather than less.
With each of these 4 insights from Job, I'm going to leave you with a question. And the first question is, what habits do you think prepare us to weather the storms of life? The habits of our heart were revealed, and the habits of our heart were refined through the storm that hit our life. The second insight from Job is that pain reveals and refines our relationships. Pain reveals and refines our relationships. You find out who your real friends are. You find out what your relationships are really made out of. I spent many months literally living in the pediatric intensive care unit. I saw children and families come and go. I heard the death wail. I heard the arguments between couples blaming one another. I learned that 80% of families that go through the death of a child end up wrecked in divorce. 80%. Pain reveals and refines our relationships. So it's not surprising that in Job 2:9, Job's wife said to him, "Are you still holding fast on your integrity? Curse God and die." Ladies, this is not what your husband's going to want to hear when he loses his job. Husbands, this is not what your wife's going to want to hear when her children experience sickness or even death. But let's not be too hard on Job's wife. She had just lost 7 children. We can give her some grace. Pain really does reveal and refine our relationships, and revealed and refined Job's relationships. Job had some really good friends. In Job 2:11-13, it said, when Job's 3 friends heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. The morning after Ian died, my best friend from college from the East Coast showed up at my door. He had gotten in a plane immediately, and he came and showed up at my door and did not leave for a week. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. These Arabs know how to grieve. We Americans don't do death that well, actually. We need to learn to express our grief. And then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Job's friends got it right until they opened their mouths. And it is so often what happens in the middle of grief. People don't know what to say. And so they'll blurt out ridiculous things. They're trying to give them grace, but so often we're better to just show up and be with, be present in the midst of others' grief. When Ian died, we had a memorial service a few days later. 2,000 people showed up. And then we had a second memorial service back on the East Coast where we used to live. Another 500 people showed up. And at that second memorial service, we had a receiving line, and these were our lifelong friends. We were new in Colorado when he died. And at second memorial service, I think all 500 people came through the receiving line. I was standing there for 2 hours talking to people. I don't remember what a single one of them said, but I do remember one encounter. It was one of the last ones. Our dear friend, Minako Ishikawa, who had come to Christ through our international student ministry. She had waited and waited, and she came. She didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around me and cried. I remember that. She showed up, and she cried with me. Pain reveals and refines our relationships if we let it. Often we Americans, and many other people, Asians in particular, we hide our pain. We don't want to let other people know that we're hurting. We need to share our pain with others in the body of Christ so that the body of Christ can act like the body of Christ is supposed to act. A few years ago, I closed the door and somehow got my hand caught in the door. So I had all my fingers in the door with the door closed. And I'm telling you, the rest of my body responded. My vocal cords got really busy. My knees fell to the ground. My heart started racing. The body is supposed to respond to a member of the body that's in pain. But sometimes we cut off the connection. You know what happens when people have leprosy is the nerves die. So they can go up and put their hand on the stove that's hot and they don't even know that their hand is burning until they smell the burning flesh. That's what happens when you have a sick body that has leprosy. We're supposed to be a healthy body that knows what's going on in one another's lives, and we share our pain with one another so that we can comfort one another. Pain reveals and refines our relationships. So my question is, how have you seen relationships grow stronger or weaker when family or friends are in pain? Third insight from Job is that pain reveals and refines our core beliefs. Job 13:15 is just one evidence of this when Job said, "Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him." Job 13:15, "Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him." The morning that Ian died, I had spent the entire weekend at his side praying for his healing. I woke up Monday morning and knew I could tell this was it. We'd already made decisions about what we were going to do. I called my wife. She may have run a few traffic lights getting to the hospital. And we made that decision to tell the doctors to turn off the machines. And we sat on either side of his bed and we watched all the vital signs go down to zero. And my wife reached across his body and she took my hand and she said, "We will still trust God." Pain reveals and refines our core beliefs. James 1:2-4 says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith will produce endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." We live in a broken world, and we will suffer pain. Will we let endurance have its perfect result, or will we shrink back and allow our heart to become hardened and withdraw from God because we no longer believe He's good? We have choices to make when we experience pain. Job 32:1 reveals another part of how Job's heart was revealed. These men, his friends, stopped answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Job was a blameless man, but he had some hard issues that God intended to deal with and did deal with. And many of us have the same issues. We think that if we just go to church, if we have our quiet time, read our Bible, pray for our kids, stay out of sin, then somewhere in the contract it says God will give us a free pass when it comes to suffering. And when God allows suffering in our lives, then we raise our fist to God and say, "I thought we had a deal, God. I thought that if I did the right things, you would give me a free pass." And we get angry with God. In the midst of our suffering, I wrote this in my journal about seasoned trust. Yesterday, I was reminded that it seems important to many to say that God would never hurt us. That line of thinking concerns me deeply because it sets up people to become disillusioned with God or with those who teach such things. It also concerns me because it requires disregarding so much of how God reveals himself in the scriptures, and it touches on an open nerve for me as we walk through painful circumstances with our son. Has God forgotten us? No. Is God mad at us? I don't think so. This brings me back to something that has become more and more precious to me: seasoned trust. Naive trust says, God will always work out things the way I want them to be. I want them to be. Notice the big I in that sentence. Seasoned trust says, God might hurt me, but I trust him anyway. Why would I trust him anyway? I've seen so much of his love and goodness in the scriptures and in my life, so the torrents of pain have to flow around those immovable rocks. Trust is the cord that keeps me lashed to the mast as the hurricane seems to be tearing everything else from its moorings. Trust enables me to trace the ways of God's decisions. Trust keeps hope alive and even eager as it waits. Trust nurtures and protects my memory of what is true and right. Trust protects my longings. Protects my longing for God when it might have been extinguished. Trust strengthens my spirit to keep looking for God when he seems to be so far away. So the question I leave with you is, how have you observed core beliefs being revealed or refined when you or people you love have been in pain? Finally, pain reveals and refines our view of God himself. The end of Job, which you'll get to eventually in your series, Job 42:3, it says, surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. 42:5, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. I'm here to tell you that now I talk about God less and worship him more. That takes me to a scene around a barbecue. About a year after my son died, I was with my two brother-in-laws. About a year after my son died, my sister died of cancer also. I was with her husband. And about that same time, my niece, my other brother-in-law's daughter, was dying. We thought she was dying of breast cancer. So the three of us were carrying heavy hearts. And, we're guys, we're barbecuing. We don't talk about our feelings. But in this case, we did. And we talked about how our worship had been transformed. We talked about how we rarely anymore worship without tears and without having deep heart connection with God because we need him so desperately and we're getting to know him more deeply. See, we get to choose. All of us here probably say we really want to know God. But I would say, do you really want to know God? Do you want to know the God who is, or the one that you wish he was? Do you want to know who God? Do you really want to know God? Because he's kind of scary. He's really big. And he's not your celestial bellhop. He's in charge, and he's good. Although you will sometimes have trouble seeing how your life demonstrates that. If you really want to know God, fasten your seatbelt. Remember how God revealed himself at Mount Sinai, and Moses went up, and the Israelites stayed back, trembling. Moses went up into the darkness, which is where you really get to know God. The Israelites said, no, you talk to us for him. We're not sure. He's kind of scary. And God is kind of scary, but boy, is he worth knowing. Pain reveals and refines our view of God himself. So my final question is, how has your view of God matured through the hard experiences of life? Some people pull back from God. They shrink back. When God brings something hard into their lives, they pull back from God, and their heart becomes hard and calcified. And they may still come to church, but something died, and they don't press on to know him well. My wife has experienced a lot of pain in her life. When she was a little girl, tragic accident cut off her fingers, one hand. They were able to put some of them back on. When she was a little girl, she suffered the most horrific abuse. I don't know if you're familiar with satanic ritual abuse, but she endured it. I did not know such evil existed. Years later, she began having flashbacks of what she had experienced as a little girl, and it almost wrecked her. I thought for a couple of years I was going to have to leave her in a mental institution. So much pain. God healed her and revealed himself to her in the midst of that. And right on the tail end of her healing with that is when our son was diagnosed with cancer. And that first night in the intensive care unit with my son, God whispered to me, and sometimes these thoughts come to your mind, you know it's not yourself. And he whispered this strange thought. He said, I'm going to heal Renee through Ian's sickness. I have no idea what that means, Lord, but that's exactly what happened. My wife has turned into this amazing warrior woman of prayer and worship. Intercessory worship is her life. It is not unusual for me to come into our room, which is her prayer closet, and find her on her face, pouring out her praise and worship to God. When you pray with my wife, you know you've been to heaven and back. But that did not come easily. She's radiant, and she's joyful in worship, and she knows God in ways that very few people do. Do you want to go there? I want to go there.